They are back. It's time for Red America Radio. Straight up conservative talk for today's red-blooded America. With the host of Behind the Headlines, TV's Karyn Turk and Dr. Christpher Metzler, political commentator and best-selling author. Making radio great again. Red America Radio.
Hello and welcome to Red America Radio with me and the lovely, gorgeous Mrs. Florida. In my view, Mrs. Florida forever, Karyn Turk.
Thank you. Yes, I'm infamous and not real famous, but infamous at least.
Well, hey, better to be infamous than not known, or some of the crazies here in Palm Beach. Lovely Palm Beach, Florida.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Actually, Roger Stone, that's one of Stone's rules. Never, better to be infamous than never be famous at all. Exactly.
Mm-hmm. And we know that in Palm Beach, I think I stopped counting at 500,000 stalkers of you. So.
No, it's a pretty big number. It's a pretty big crowd, and they're a pretty productive group as well. Not as productive as these rioters, which were pretty unbelievable last night. Watching the RNC, we all knew that something was going to go on, but I don't think anybody expected them to go after Rand Paul. And these people are just so misdirected, whether it's my own stalkers or these people that want to disrupt last night, because Rand Paul is actually the person that went to bat for Breonna Taylor.
Yeah,
did they forget about that?
Yeah, well, I don't think they care. Look, the issue is, from the standpoint of Democrats, the road to the White House is not paved with riots, Black Lives Matter, or any of this other stuff. What the heck is wrong with you? And all of these people who are engaged in rioting, look, protesting, I believe in protesting, but what's with the rioting? What does that get you? And to go after the purveyor of peace, Rand Paul? Are you kidding me?
This was such a head scratcher for me. And I said to myself, there's got to be a lot of people on the other side of the aisle that I believe and I think it was a blessing. I want to go on record and say that I think it was a blessing that they broadcast this on CNN, because yes. I believe that there were a lot of moderate Americans, moderate Democrats who, may not really be Democrats, but believe they're Democrats. And yes. I think that you couldn't not watch the RNC and not see the love of America, the passion for what's gone on, the commitment of the president, the fulfillment of the promises that he made on the campaign trail, and then to have the culmination be not only the Rand Paul thing, which to me was completely appalling, that illustrates the misdirection of these rioter protesters and the fact that they really have no grasp on what's actually happening. But then to also see them put the president in a guillotine, that's a federal crime. Isn't that a felony?
Yeah, absolutely. And to look at all of that, I don't know what the end game is here. If the end game is to get Joe Biden elected, well, that dog don't hunt. That's just how it is.
It's a bad plan of attack in every sense of the words. And that's what it is. It's a misdirected attack, and they're attacking the wrong people. And they don't even know why they're rioting anymore. They've just totally lost all focus. They're just there to be disruptive. And whether it's Antifa or not Antifa, I don't really think it matters. But I have to believe that most moderate Democrats that watch the coverage of the RNC on CNN said to themselves, damn, this is a lot better than the DNC. Even the fireworks were better.
Well, yeah. And I mean, you look at that, I don't know, whatever that thing is that the Democrats had relative to the acceptance speech. And then you look at what the president did relative to his acceptance speech, gotta tell you, the two don't even compare. And this whole notion, and what was that pre-buttal that Kamala did? I was like, what?
Yeah, it's a what? It's just a head scratcher. And, you know, I'm so excited about our guest today because I think that I'm kind of hoping that we're getting some moderate people that might be on the fence about how they're going to vote in November, on November 3rd. And maybe they're watching this and maybe they're wondering to themselves, what makes Trump tick? Yes. And that brings me to our wonderful guest.
Oh, he's fantastic.
He actually knows what makes Trump tick because he went to high school with our wonderful president. And our guest is Peter Ticktin, and he just finished his book, which is appropriately named What Makes Trump Tick. And we're going to have him up here a little bit more into the show and talk to him a little bit about his experience in knowing the president for a very long time and what makes him an amazing leader.
Yeah, and he's not talking about it from a secondhand perspective. He's not talking about it from something that he read somewhere. He's talking about a lifelong, pretty much, friendship with the president. And so what he is revealing to our guests is, to our viewers rather, is just absolutely fantastic. So I believe our viewers are really going to enjoy this.
I know, it's really exciting. And, you know, I've interviewed Peter before, and I love that Peter brings this history to the table. It's these little known facts about our president. You know, we all know who he was when he was a billionaire in New York. We all know who he was when he became the president. We've all seen his public life, the life in front of the camera, even if you want to go on the side of the Apprentice reality show personality that we all know and love. But when you look at who he was before that, there's very little information on him. You know, you can go out and you can read, you know, the book by Mary Trump or, you know, some of these other things. But here is a person who grew up with him, who knew him when he was a kid, and they grew up together essentially and had this amazing experience at the New York Military Academy. So it really does. It gets you behind the scenes of what makes our president tick.
And the only place, of course, that you can get behind the scenes is on Red America Radio. Mm-hmm. And so that's why we bring you the most exciting guests. That's why we bring you the people who are in the know and not the people who simply want to be known.
Absolutely. And we are really blessed that we have these wonderful guests that want to come onto our show and reach our audience. And I want to remind everybody who's watching or listening that if you listen to us on broadcast radio, we're actually moving over to Spotify and Google Play and every other great place that you listen to amazing podcasts, because our podcast has really taken off. And it seems that that's the direction that everybody's heading, and everybody wants to listen to us on podcasts. So that's where we're going to be.
Oh, absolutely. And the podcast is the way to go. And plus on the podcast, what we do is give a lot more than we give here. So if you want to get the full scoop or the full tea, as they say, you definitely have to listen to the podcast.
Yeah, exclusive behind the scenes content on Red America Radio, only available on the podcast. And then, of course, we also have our YouTube channel. And, you know, I think we're both pretty easy on the eyes, Chris. So there are a lot of people that are going to want to watch us and not just listen to us. So they can go to our YouTube channel or catch us live on Facebook or Instagram each week as well.
Absolutely. The places to be. And say, we at Red America Radio, we give you choices. We give you variety. It's the conservative way.
We do. That's right. We give people choices. And that's why it's so important. You know, we have a big choice to make on November 3rd as a country. And we got to take our country back. We got to end this craziness with the COVID crisis, get back to work, do the things that we need to do to rebuild the economy that we've lost over the last several months. You know, looking at the accomplishments that our president made prior to the COVID crisis, I don't think it's going to be very hard for us to get back there, but we got to band together as Americans and get back to work.
Well, and we compare the president's record with that of the House of Representatives. Democrat-led House of Representatives. What have they done?
Yeah,
I don't believe they've done
exactly.
anything. And then Nancy comes out and says, just between you and me, and don't tell Joe Biden I said this, I don't think there should be any debates. Nancy, I thought you were off your rocker before. I'm now convinced you're totally gone.
Yeah,
I mean, seriously?
they don't want him to debate. And I mean, this isn't just about Nancy being drunk and stupid this time. It's actually about the fact that they do not want Joe Biden to come out of the basement and debate because they know that he's going to lose. Look at 2016. Look at what a genius President Trump was. Even if you don't like his brand of style, which I personally love, being from the tri-state area, but let's say you like a softer approach. Maybe, you watch and he said, it's a lot, he's a little off the cuff, he's a little nasty to these people, but he had some one-liners that I'm still playing because really he can debate like nobody's business, whether you're a fan of that brand of delivery or not. He can debate, and they don't want Biden to debate him. I'm actually predicting, and I predicted last night during my coverage of the RNC, I predicted last night that he will not debate the president. I'm going to stick by that.
Oh, I agree. I don't think that he's going to debate at all because what does he have to lose if he debates? Oh, how about everything?
Absolutely.
Because there's no way that he can have a coherent sentence together. And by the way, there's nothing on the teleprompter during a debate. And so that's going to make it even awkward. I mean, and part of it's going to be, is he even gonna remember that he's debating? Or is he gonna think he was debating George Washington? I'm not sure.
Or he's running for Senate again. It's just a perplexing situation every time. They did a really good job. We talked about the Hollywood spectacle of the DNC last week and how they did a very good job of reining him in and producing that thing in a way that he seemed to be moderately well spoken. But if you've watched him any other time, you know that it was basically a fraud. Yeah.
And he simply read from the teleprompter. He was, propped up, and so he was able to do that. But that's a controlled environment. And as you said, whether you like the president's style or not, the debate is not a controlled environment. And so he is going to need to be able to respond and to respond quickly. Ain't gonna happen.
And I'm pretty confident that Biden interview was edited. I haven't done the research, but I'm sure that there's some people online that are pulling that apart, as I intend to do, and figure out where the edit points are in that, because I don't believe that he could have stood up and delivered a half an hour speech, even with the teleprompter, with those, with that minimum amount of mistakes. So I think that was pre-recorded and edited. I think it had to be, just based on his delivery every other time that we've ever watched him.
Yeah, and I'm sure you're going to go behind
the headlines.
Behind the headlines there.
For sure. So, my favorite speaker from the last night of the debates was Alice Johnson. I thought that Alice Johnson, not only did I love the fact that she talked about redemption, and I think it's such an important topic, not only for prison reform and right now for that narrative, but also for the cancel culture narrative that we have in this country. And she talked about forgiveness and the fact that the president showed her compassion by granting her clemency. And here's a woman, and this is something that a lot of people don't know, she would have never gotten the sentence that she got, and actually gotten 5 consecutive life sentences as a woman who had no prior history because of the severity of the drug crime that they charged her with. But that was actually a Joe Biden-sponsored bill that allowed them to deliver that sentence.
Absolutely. And so for him now to suggest, Alice, I thought, was absolutely fantastic, and in my view was one of the most effective and insightful speakers of the entire 4 days. From my perspective, what Alice was really able to do is to bring it home so that people understand it. Look, Biden is for, he claims, criminal justice reform and social justice, except for the crime bills that he's written, sponsored, voted for. That is exactly the opposite. So is he now all anti those bills after he had put them in place? Give me a break.
That's a really good point, and we're gonna leave you with that point. We're gonna pick this back up because I have another thought on this topic, but we're gonna take a quick break to commercial, and we'll be right back.
Divided We Stand. The Search for America's Soul is the most important book of our time. Best-selling author Dr. Christpher Metzler answers, "What the heck is going on, America?" Divided We Stand is a funny, fast-paced, razor-sharp, savvy critique of the state of our union and the disastrous reign of Barack Obama. Political lion slayer, red-blooded conservative Dr. Metzler offers inspiration and a positive message to America. The way to fight back and win is principle, conviction, and a wicked sense of humor.
In the days of clickbait news and salacious eyeball-popping headlines, you must delve behind the headlines. Things can get so murky on the internet that it's hard to see. Behind the Headlines TV on YouTube delves deep to fully expose the real truth. Each episode, Karyn Turk wades through the swampy news in thigh-high boots, breaking facts down into bite-sized pieces. Subscribe to Behind the Headlines TV to see her dominate YouTube with real facts behind today's biggest stories.
And we're back. Red America Radio.
Yeah, we're back. So we were on the topic of Alice Johnson and talking a little bit about that delivery of that speech and the redemption of it all. And, you know, I think that this is a really big tipping point for a lot of people. I think what our president did in terms of prison reform, you know, and I speak from a little bit of experience here, Chris, during my 30 days that I spent in that maximum security federal prison, I met a lot of really interesting people. And it was really eye-opening for me, just, you know, as somebody who's never, ever been involved in the criminal justice system in my whole life, to walk in there and see these people that really, you know, didn't, I hate to say didn't belong there, but didn't belong there for the extent of the sentences, where to me it seemed the sentences were really extreme. They didn't fit the crime necessarily, or people that really wanted to have a better life, that wanted to redeem themselves and weren't necessarily given the opportunities to do so, and come from really, you know, socioeconomic backgrounds and familial backgrounds that put them in the system, sometimes for their entire lives for the most part. And, you know, when she talked about redemption, my mind went to all these people that I met and how I was touched by their lives and their stories and how it impacted me greatly. And it just kept bringing me back to the fact that in America, we're supposed to have freedom, love for God and country, love for other people, our fellow Americans. And that includes people that are in the system, that are in prison. We should be working with these people to reform them. And, you know, if they're able to be rehabilitated and not reoffend, why are we locking people up forever? Look at this woman. She's, you know, she saw her grandkids for the first time and she spent 20 some odd years in prison. It's mind-boggling.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing about and here's the difference relative to what the president understands and what the president does, and the hypocrisy of the Democrats and Joe Biden. That's the difference, because the president understands and believes in redemption. He believes in giving people the opportunity to reform who can be reformed. He certainly believes in that. The Biden philosophy, the Democratic philosophy, has been, until up too late, to keep people in prison forever. That's been their philosophy. And so it is laughable when they talk about the fact that they are for redemption and reform. They might want to start off by reforming the Democratic Party and purging it of its hypocrisy, of its hate, of all of those things, they might want to start there. I think that would be a good place to start.
I think there's a lot of work to do on that subject. And I don't think that there's any way that that work is getting done by November. And I think we've got this by a landslide. And,
Yes.
you know, I think if you consider yourself a lifelong Democrat, you got to look at the facts now, and you got to say to yourself, unless I'm a socialist, unless I want to live in a communist country or on the borderline of communism, I have, you know, really my option is to vote for President Trump and keep the good things happening, keep making America great, at least for the next 4 years. And you know what? Then you have another opportunity to come in and vote somebody else in. But we've made so much progress, whether you look at prison reform or you look at the economy and all of the things before pre-COVID and this, you know, political narrative that has now sucked us all in. You know, the wins are obvious, and the difference between the DNC and the RNC were striking.
Yes.
And I had a lot of people that came that don't agree with me, that think I'm a far right extremist. And it's hard to believe that they would think that, but they do. They came to me and they said, you know what, I don't necessarily love President Trump and his delivery, but, you know, that's the option that I have this election season. I am going to vote for the president. And I think he's going to win by a landslide. I think we got it.
Yep. And I've gotten a number of calls, texts, et cetera, from people who are saying, you know, I've been a member of the Democratic Party for a long time, but Democrats are not in my best interest, and I'm not going to vote against my self-interest. And so I am voting for the president.
Yeah, and that brings me to our guest. Let's find out a little bit about what makes Trump tick and why he is who he is. Let's invite Peter in. Let's get him on the line.
We're so happy to have you on the show. So, you know, there's been a lot of gossip about the fact that the president cheated on the SAT. There've been tapes. It's been, I don't know, a regular Peyton place. But what else is new in Washington? But you know the president well. You know from personal experience. So what are they talking about?
Suggestion that he cheated in his SAT exams is actually, it's preposterous because it's impossible. We had 100 guys in our class. There were also 2 post-grads, and that's who took that exam. Now, back then in 63, 64, our senior year, there was only one time you took the SATs. It wasn't like today where you can take it a whole bunch of times and then use your best scores. There, it was what you got on that day. You were either there or you were square. If you wanted to go to college, you were there that day. Whether you were sick or you were healthy, it didn't matter. You were there. And Donald was there that day. I know I took the SATs with him. And there's no way in the world that somebody else, I mean, there were 100 cadets in our class. We all knew each other. The proctors, the teachers that monitored the exam, they knew us. So there's no way in the world that any of us could have had somebody else come into the room, pretend that they were Donald Trump and take the exam for them. It didn't happen. It's pure fiction. It's impossible. You know, it's a good story because in a big school with 3,000 students taking the exams, who knows what could happen. But this person didn't realize that they were talking about New York Military Academy, and that made it impossible. Besides that, in those days, there were you didn't take an SAT to go to graduate school. You went to Fordham. I mean, the whole thing is just a nonsense story told for the sake of making money and becoming famous. I could have really come up with a good story in my book about something that happened in the showers. I could make up a whole bunch of different lines. I'd have instant fame. I'd be on every network except for Fox News because they might be a little bit more careful, and I'd make a lot of money on a book like that. So you know, there's reasons why people lie, and for me, what I said, everything I say in the book is true, and I don't have anything that's scandalous, but it's a fun book to read, and you're going to get a really good idea of what makes Donald tick. Because you know, the fact of the matter is that he's not a fearful person, and that fear got shed at New York Military Academy. They put us through so much fear in our first year that once we got the gumption to stand up to that. That lack of fear, that exhaustion of the fear lasts the rest of our lives. Not just me, not just Donald Trump, but for just about all of the cadets that went to New York Military Academy in those days.
Might be the president calling.
Yeah, the president's calling you right now because he knows you're on our show.
You were listening. That's okay, I'll call.
That's great.
But Peter,
You'll call back. All right, I understand. I mean, and he can wait until we're done.
Busy.
But Peter, it's fascinating to me because, yeah, it makes for good television, it makes for good gossip, but what you've just said in terms of the president's ability to really get the fear out, I think really is proven in how he has run his presidency under such tremendous pressure, under such scathing attacks, under all of these things, but he has still been able to retain his composure. So it seems to me that part of that has to have been that initial foundational training and education.
He's the first president that's had the guts to move the embassy to Jerusalem, just as an example, okay? But it's not really guts. It's not like he's being really courageous. It's just that he's not full of that fear that stop all failures from becoming successful. He's not saying, oh, but if I do, what, somebody's not going to like me anymore. I mean, he's not full of all of that fear. He doesn't have the fear. So it's not a matter of bravery. It's more a matter of lacking that particular kind of fear that stops people in their tracks.
Yeah, absolutely. On the question of nationalism, it's amazing to me how the media has essentially translated the term nationalism into racism, into KKK, into all of those kinds of things, because the president has made it clear that he's a nationalist. Then they say, so are you a white nationalist? It's, to me, the question is about really what is best for the country. So all of this pile-on relative to that, I don't see how that helps the situation. I think it further divides the country, actually.
Well, I think you're right about that. I mean, I know, when you look at Donald Trump, you see a man who's 74 years of age. I look at Donald Trump and I still see that 17-year-old in him, just like a parent of grown children see the child in their adult children. When you knew somebody when they were young, that's the way they were. And I could talk about some of the things about the way he was at that point, such as his leadership abilities and so on, which were there. I learned from him. But the fact is that now, but going back there in terms of just that one issue you raised, the term, the N-word, I mean, not the N-word, but the term N-word.
Right.
We never had that term. Nobody called anything the N-word back in the 60s because it's perfectly fine for anybody to use the actual word. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not a polite word. There's no way that it ever meant anything other than a derogatory, nasty remark or a statement. But people who wanted to say it, there was nothing to stop them from saying it. We even had one of our teachers that most of us did not like for that reason, who would use that word in his conversations. Donald, it's not that he rarely used that word. He would never, ever use that word because he didn't think that way. It wasn't in his mindset. He didn't hate people. He didn't have time to hate people. He had to do what he had to do, which it was studying, working on whatever he was working on, perfecting his pitching for baseball, whatever it was. When you're a decent, honest person working hard on things, there's no time for hate. And he never had that as a youth. Another thing I hear not only is that he is a racist from people that have no clue, don't know him. Nobody that knows him ever says he's a racist. Mm-hmm. But they also say he's a bully.
Yeah.
Well, if you're going to be a bully, you're going to do it when you're 17. You're going to be a bully when you're a captain of a company. You're going to be a bully when you're bigger than the people around you. Okay, but he was never a bully. In fact, there was a lot of hazing that went on in New York Military Academy.
Sure.
I've seen captains go up to a cadet standing in formation, and when they're passing their rifle over for inspection, knee them in a place where nobody should be kneed. You know what I'm talking about? I've seen all kinds of brutality there at that school. But again, it was never happening under Donald Trump. The hazing routine just wasn't happening. Nobody needed to. It just wasn't going on. Donald really ran that company in a way that I gave some examples in the book of different things that had occurred, but basically he ran it as not as a person who you feared, but as a person who was so decent that you just didn't want to disappoint him. That's who Donald Trump is. That's who he was, and that never changed in his life, as far as I know. And I've, stayed up with him, not necessarily hand in hand, but at least reading everything as well as visiting him. I've never seen it in his entire life. And I know that Donald Trump says he doesn't believe in global warming, but at the same time, if there's anybody that I want in charge of things, it's a guy that knows how to deal with them, a guy that knows how to fix things, a guy that's got a heart for everybody. And that's Donald Trump.
Amazing. Amazing. And I know, Chris, you have one last question before we wrap up this amazing interview with What Makes Trump Tick author, Peter Ticktin. So I'm going to let you go.
Yeah, so just real quick, it seems to me that what occurred with this virus was that China was, in fact, developing a biological weapon. Somehow, that biological weapon got out, whether was on the surface of someone's lab coat or whatever, it got out. So the interesting thing for me would be whether looking at this as a war crime would be one of the things that comes to play. So just a theory, but I think a fairly reasonable one.
It is a reasonable one, but I will tell you this: it's going to be gone. I believe it will be gone before the election, and that's
absolutely.
It's amazing. It's going to be just like Donald Trump said.
We all agree there.
Yeah. Well, you know how many Zika cases there were in the United States last year? One.
Yeah.
There's only one. It disappears. It's like a bad headache. You don't even notice when it leaves because it's gone. And so that's what's going to be happening before the election. And I think that's going to help us greatly in terms of getting things together. Although, there's still a resistance out there that want us to fail.
Great. Thank you.
There we go. But we're not going to let them fail. We're not going to let them fail. We're going to win this in 2020. Thank you, Peter, so much for joining us. It's always a pleasure.
We're back. Wasn't that a fascinating interview with Peter? Because now you know what makes Trump tick. It was simply amazing, breathtaking. And I think really you should follow Peter's work because Peter just tells it like it is, and it's from a genuine place.
It is. It is. And, he's one of the few Republicans that believes in global warming. So if that's something that you believe in, that's a social cause that you believe that you have to back and you're concerned about it, it's important to note that he's a very outspoken Republican on that side of things. And I think it's a good illustration that shows that even though we're conservative Republicans, some of us have different viewpoints on social issues and, issues when it comes to the environment. And Peter's a testament of that. He agrees with the president on almost everything, but when it comes to global warming, he's been an advocate of, finding good scientific change and working on those causes. And I commend him for it because it's really something he's passionate about.
Oh, absolutely. And I, that combination is fascinating because as Republicans, as conservatives, a number of us say, global warming, but the way he talks about it, I think is particularly effective.
It is. And I love that he's got some pretty unconventional ideas, there were a couple that he had told me about on a prior show when I interviewed him, and they left me going like, but I actually looked them up and researched the things that he told me, and they were decent possibilities and things that were being explored scientifically. So, Peter's an interesting person, and I hope we have him on again and we can talk a little bit more about some of these other things, because not only does he know what makes Trump tick, he also has some interesting perspectives on other issues, and he's just a really knowledgeable, genuine, nice person, and I always love interviewing him.
Oh, absolutely. And so next week, folks, we're going to have a very exciting guest, Pastor Shannon Wright. She is the Republican candidate running for mayor of Baltimore City. Black woman, Republican, Christian, running against the Democrat-controlled Baltimore City, where there are probably more rats than there are residents. She is going to talk about how she's going to clean up the city. She has two opponents. One person who claims on the Democratic side that he is a new face, except for the fact he's been in Democratic politics all his life. And by the way, he won the Democratic nomination with only 30% of the vote. Then you have, a Republican turned independent who had the nerve to ask her to drop out of the race because there's no path for an independent, another rhino. And so Pastor will talk about that. You don't want to miss this, folks. She is on fire and has an excellent chance of taking over the Democrat ran rat-infested Baltimore City.
Amazing. And Baltimore needs all the help it can get. It really, really does. I am so looking forward to talking with her. And she was at the RNC, wasn't she?
Yes, she did. On one of the nights, she gave the Pledge of Allegiance.
It was great.
Oh, it was fantastic. And she was also, when the vice president went to Baltimore, she was also a guest of the vice president in Baltimore.
This is going to be great. I can't wait to see her next week. Guys, we're going to be back next week. And I want to remind everybody again, catch us on Spotify, catch us on YouTube. Red America Radio is pretty much everywhere you want to be these days.
Absolutely, as we should be.
Absolutely. Been a great show, Chris. I'll see you next week.
All right, Karyn.
You have been listening to Red America Radio. Straight up conservative talk for today's red-blooded America.